continue. We don't need more.
So how did so many people miss what, in retrospect, would appear to be clear signs?
Well, it kind of appears to be conditioning. They want more of that free money out there. In part, it's the way Fed officials phrase things. But yesterday, those Fed minutes clearly showed more QE wasn't an issue on March 13th, which was before Bernanke's speech. And it appears collectively investors went back and read that, put two and two together, and realized they overreacted to his comments last week. We got a correction. But look, this morning bond yields are essentially where they were before Bernanke spoke. Stocks, though the futures are down, are still higher than when he spoke.
So is QE3 officially off the table here? I mean, reading the tea leaves is getting tougher and tougher.
Yeah, it's not off the table. It's just not on the agenda right now. Here's the distinction that Bernanke was trying to make. It remains an option if it's necessary, but right now, it's not necessary. Look, we're 1/10 of a percentage point away from where the Fed thought unemployment would be at the end of 2012. There's plenty of risks out there. The past 2 years, the economy has dropped going into the summer, but the economy isn't making the case right now for additional stimulus, and neither are most Fed officials.
The question that I have is why investors, why markets are so sensitive to any talk of more stimulus. Look how much stimulus is already out there. There's a $9 trillion wall of cash. It's not just from the Federal Reserve. It's from the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, and by all accounts, Bernanke saying, look, it's going to stay that way for a while. So are investors overreacting to the prospect of more QE?
Well, it's a chance for them to invest cheap and make money. They like the idea, but at some point they're going to have to get used to the fact that this isn't going to be the answer anymore.
But it speaks to investing versus trading, and traders are so sensitive to this kind of news, which is why you see such a big reaction. I spoke to a long-only insurance money manager this morning who is not a trader. He's a long-term investor. He said, you know what? Yesterday was overdone, overcooked. What does it mean for long-term investors? Just what you said, an opportunity to buy. In the fixed income market, things are still strong. The new issue calendar is still very good, even in the equity market. You're not seeing IPOs slow down. They're still very oversubscribed. So if you're a long-term investor here, maybe this is a correction you like.
Mike, did anything happen between March the 13th and Ben Bernanke's most recent comments that we should look at now and say, oh, you know, Bernanke himself was picking up on something that maybe the market didn't notice?
The economy got a little bit better. We had a better than expected
Sort of
retail
not
sales
what you
report.
think, right?
So it was not what you think. Bernanke's language did change, but it changed to move away from additional QE.
The employment report coming out on Friday. Economists we polled looking for another solid number, above 200,000 extra payrolls during the month, fourth month in a row that we've seen that kind of traction. As long as the unemployment rate comes down and the
deal of sorts on the Fed, lots of insight into those Fed minutes, Ben Bernanke's speech. Now, though, it is time for a check on the markets. Everything the Fed had to say yesterday is still having an impact this morning across the board. Scarlett, tell us what's happening.
Yeah, losses overseas and losses at home as well. We're going to start with what's going on right now with the U.S. picture. U.S. stock index futures currently lower, quite a bit lower if you consider the kinds of moves that we've seen so far this year, with the S&P falling more than 1%, only one, whether it's European stocks or oil or gold. This steady line lower. But we do want to show you what's going on over in Germany as well. Overseas, I mentioned, right at 6 a.m., there was a German manufacturing report that came out. It was a disappointing, smaller increase than expected, so now the DAX is off by 1.8%. In Asia overnight, we had the Nikkei close out its biggest loss so far this year, down 2.3%. So that weakness, not just in Asia, not just in Europe, but also right here at home, coming straight home. In terms of the specific market catalysts, we were just talking about it. The Federal Reserve, according to the latest minutes, indicating no more stimulus for now. That's enough to get people going. $131.75, 108.31. And again, when you go inside the chart, this is pretty much the same pattern that you're seeing, whether it's equities, whether it's currencies, whether it's commodities. And Eric, we do have economic data due out later today as well here at home. We have the ISM services as well as a private read on jobs, not to mention the fact that the European Central Bank will come out with its rate decision next hour as well.
All right, we'll see if those economic data support the view that the market has.
Regulators are preparing to penalize J.P. Morgan for actions linked to the collapse of Lehman Brothers. This is according to the New York Times. The Times saying the CFTC will file a civil case against J.P. Morgan. The bank is expected to settle it with a fine of about $20 million. Papers saying the case has to do with questionable treatment of customer money. And Burger King is going public again. The fast food chain was taken private a year and a half ago by 3G Capital. Well, now 3G is getting $1.4 billion to transfer Burger King to a company owned by billionaire investor Bill Ackman, who will take it public. And Eric, the new menu was just announced. A few days ago, so you can go try it out.
Coming up on Inside Track News Corp, after Rupert Murdoch, his children learn that being the heir apparent is no guarantee of job security. Plus, sees no miracle worker. A year after Larry Page became CEO again, has anything really changed at Google? And the once risky surgery that's given pitchers a second life and changed the business of baseball forever.
Order
It was a
pending.
clean sweep for Mitt Romney.
Order filled.
Romney last night, he added to his delegate total with primary wins in Washington, Maryland, and Wisconsin, tightening his grip on the Republican nomination. Now Romney is looking forward to the fight with President Obama come the fall. Chief Washington correspondent Peter Cook has more for us this morning. Peter?
Well, our Tuesday felt and sounded an awful lot like the first day of the general election. First, you had President Obama here in Washington singling out Romney by name in a tough speech on the budget. And then just hours later in Milwaukee, Romney celebrating his primary victories in Wisconsin, Maryland, and D.C., never mentioning his Republican rivals by name. Instead, he focused almost exclusively on the president for being anti-business.
When the president attacks business, and when his policies make it more difficult for business to grow and prosper, he's also attacking the very communities he had wanted to help. Or at least that's how it works when America is working.
Now, with his wins last night, Romney is still only about halfway to his magic delegate total of 1144, but it's not just his rhetoric shifting to the fall campaign, so is his fundraising effort. His campaign is now actively soliciting funds for the general election for the first time. And in a move normally reserved for a presumptive nominee, Romney and the Republican National Committee forming a joint fundraising committee, allowing them to bring in big dollar donations in one fell swoop. On his own, Romney can only raise $5,000 per individual for his campaign. $2,500 for the primaries, $2,500 for the general. But by working with the RNC, he can also ask for $30,800 for the national party from individuals, money that can be spent to help his campaign. Plus, he can ask for another $40,000 for state and local Republican parties. That means individuals could be forking over more than $75,000, double that for couples. But they're still playing catch-up here. President Obama has already raised nearly $300 million for his re-election effort. About half of that, Eric, has gone to a joint committee formed with the DNC. So a big advantage for the president here as we look to the fall.
Peter, let's go back to Romney for a second. He's picking up even more momentum with these three primary victories. Any sign yet that Rick Santorum is ready to step aside?
Gave no indication last night in his own speech in Pennsylvania last night. He said, listen, we're only at halftime, time to get out there and play the rest of the game. But the reality is that the pressure is building on Rick Santorum. And the real obstacle now, the real challenge for him is his home state of Pennsylvania. If Romney were to beat him in his home state of Pennsylvania later on this month, very difficult to see how Rick Santorum can stay in the race and really maintain his credibility. So that's the question mark for him now. Can he win in his home state? And even then, the pressure is still building for him to get out.
All right, Peter, thanks very much. And speaking of Matt, he's right here. He is Matt Dowd, our political analyst here at Bloomberg, helping us to game out what last night's wins mean for the Romney campaign and, of course, for the fight against the president this fall. Matt, a couple of questions to start off with. What Peter said, if Rick Santorum can't win in Pennsylvania, is it fair to say it's all over for the guy? And even before we get to Pennsylvania, for the sake of the Republican Party, should he be stepping aside?
Well, you're right. Even before Pennsylvania, it's time for him to go. But many of these candidates don't go from denial to acceptance in a very timely fashion, and he's got to get to acceptance of this. I think if he wants to preserve any political capital and any voice in the Republican Party, he should step down this week, and that would be best for him and the party. I don't think he's going to do that, but that's what he ought to do.
Now, what does this do for Mitt Romney's campaign dollars? He continues to drain them as Obama is raising money. And when he really turns the corner to potential...
The president's going to have a huge amount. Mitt Romney's going to be the exact reverse position that he was in the primary. He was outspending his opponents 3, 4, 5, 6 to 1.
And this is a much tougher fight?
It's a much tougher fight against an incumbent for president of the United States. There's only one Democrat in the last 100 years that has lost a re-election for presidency. It was Jimmy Carter in 1980. And so he's going to be faced with the exact thing Rick Santorum was faced with, which was being outspent by somebody who was a formal opponent. He's got to raise money, he's got to raise it fast, and he's got to do it by July 4th.
I'm curious about the face-off on actual economic policy. It's the economy election. Romney said that Obama's economic policies have been a bust. Who has the upper hand here? I mean, Romney certainly has the experience, but Obama can point to the improvement.
Well, it's a great question, Sarah, because I think what you're going to see is dueling arguments. You're going to see from Mitt Romney is take a look at wherever the country was in January when the president took office and where it is today, and we're still not caught up with jobs. That will be his argument. President Obama's argument is going to be take a look at where we were at the worst point a year or so ago, year and a half ago, and look what we've done since then, which he's got a positive trajectory in adding jobs in the stock market. And so that's going to be the dueling argument. I think it's a tougher argument for Mitt Romney to make today on the economy than it was 6 months ago, because people are feeling more and more positive about the economy, but he still has to put his money on the economy because it's the only way he can win.
Nevertheless, the data points show the economy is getting better. So how does that help a Rick Santorum that the economy is getting better and he can point to social issues as his main platform?
Well, that was his window. He had a small window of opportunity to win this race. I actually think the race was probably over when he failed to come out at the debate before Michigan and win Michigan. Once he lost Michigan, that was his window. He was turning to social issues. He was getting some wind behind his back, and then he had a bad debate performance, and ever since then, he has not been able to get that back, and that's why Mitt Romney is really the Republican nominee at this point.
And it's better, but we still have 8.3% unemployment in this country.
Yeah, and that's the argument that Mitt Romney's going to continue to make.
Matt, speaking of which, when are we going to see Mitt the moderate come out? And when he does, how is that going to change his tone, if at all, on the economy and on jobs, the things that people still really care about?
Well, that's a real big strategic question that the campaign and Mitt Romney has to answer, because they don't want to do it too soon.
Target filled.
Because they still have a convention to go through with a lot of delegates who are not enthusiastic about him. But I think what you'll start seeing is him unifying the party. He's not even mentioning Rick Santorum's name, as Peter Cook said. You'll start seeing him unify the party, and I think you'll really see that turn when they present messages at the convention. That's when you'll see that big turn to go and start appealing to independent voters. But he has to be careful in the next 3 months to do that while these primaries are still going on.
Who's left for Mitt Romney to raise money from? I mean, he's really gone to his focus core group who supports him. And many voters out there are lukewarm about Mitt, so maybe they'll vote for him. But as far as